What is up, guys? How we doing? Shalom. I have a quick intro for you this week. I'm actually going to try to make it really quick because I just want to jump right into the teaching. But today, the teaching is on a really interesting topic. It's about that scripture that we have where it's referring to, and I believe it's Paul, where he's talking about how, like, by one man we were all made sinners, and then by the work of another man we were all justified. And so in this video, Derek is unpacking that a little bit, and it's a really good conversation. I hope there were moments where I kind of had my finger over the mic, so I'm hoping that it's mostly clear. I listened to it. It seems like it's pretty clear. There's some spots there that I kind of wish were a little bit louder, but for the most part, I would say it's a pretty good recording. So yeah, we'll just we'll go ahead and jump right into it. And I guess maybe just a quick reminder to those who might be listening that the Truth, the Book of James, is available on Amazon. It is a novel that my teacher and I we worked on it together, and the whole point of the book, it's a novel, but it's meant to really be a parabolic picture of the fear of the Lord. And it's supposed to really be that teaching tool, or a teaching tool, to maybe help answer some of those challenging questions. And, the challenging questions that my teacher went through over the 2 decades that he's been walking in this truth. And so this book is kind of it's like his baby that has been brought forward to try and share with those who might be so inclined or interested. So if you've ever found yourself wondering how we square away the experience of will that we have, maybe some people would call it a free will, and the truth about God's will and his sovereignty, how those two things interconnect. And so if that's of any interest to you, and also you just enjoy maybe novels and, fun stories or something, go check it out. It's available again on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. So yeah, I guess let's jump right into the teaching.
Men weren't being condemned and judged by it until the law came. Now, they still suffered the consequence of sin, which was death, but sin wasn't imputed because there was no law. But when the law of Moses came, which it's by the law that there's knowledge of sin. So now that there was a knowledge of sin, then the consequence of sin was then imputed unto men who were under the law. And then, those who were without the law would perish just because they were without the law. But under the law was the knowledge of sin, and so sin was there the whole time, applying to everybody. But then when the law came, the consequence of sin and the condemnation from it was now like being imputed on them, and like they were getting the consequence of it. Does this make sense so far?
Mm-hmm.
So too, the free gift has come upon all men, so it's there for everybody, but it's by the gospel that is the knowledge of salvation, is the knowledge of this justification. Just like the law brought the knowledge of sin, and thus when that knowledge comes, then there's the imputing of the consequence of it.
Interesting.
So in the same way, the free gift of justification of life is now upon all people. And by the gospel comes the knowledge of that justification of life. And through that knowledge, and thus belief, the consequence of that justification is imputed unto them, which results in salvation. So justification has come upon all men, but salvation is only imputed when there's the knowledge of that justification, or when there's faith.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? So salvation. So we wouldn't say that salvation has necessarily come to all men, but it's justification, and
right.
Salvation is a result of believing. So, and that's what he's saying there. Actually, like For I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation for anyone who believes. So the result of salvation is the result of that justification being applied to somebody. Just like condemnation is the result of sin being applied to somebody. Right?
Interesting.
And so sin law imputes condemnation. Justification, gospel imputes salvation.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That's interesting, yeah. Because, like, the picture there of sin coming upon all men, and then you're saying the condemnation doesn't come until the law, or the punishment for sin doesn't come until you bring the law in to, like,
right, which
make
is
it
what
known.
Romans 5 is talking about, right? Because, well, here, I'll even read it specifically. Which this is what in Pennsylvania keeps trying to say that, well, sin wasn't in the world until the law, so the law like created sin. Like, no, it's only by law. No,
Are you still talking to me?
no,
Oh.
I've talked to him a long time.
I wonder how he's doing.
Yeah,
It's a wild boy, that.
It's kind of funny you talk about this because I feel like it goes with this that I had a question about yesterday. Because it says, if I had not come and spoken to them, they would not have been guilty of sin.
right.
But now they have no excuse for their sin.
They have no cloak, yeah.
So does that mean if Jesus hadn't have came, there wouldn't have been, like they wouldn't have known there was sin?
Right, and so there's it's like a I don't want to use the word accountability, but belief, right? That because really what's okay, so when we'll say belief, but it's really actually like a judgment that's in operation there. So now, when we say believe, we say, well, I'm believing the gospel, but actually what you're doing is you're making a judgment that God is true. Like it's a judgment in the affirmative sense. But if you were to reject it, that's a judgment that, like, no, that's a lie, right? So when we're believing or we're rejecting, we're judging, and so that's what happens when the law comes, right? Because then it you know it makes it by setting forth the commandments and like basically like drawing lines or bringing information, it kind of forces a person into judgment, right? So in the same way, like if somebody were to be given the gospel, which like that's what Jesus is referring to, like him preaching to them, or if we were to preach the gospel to somebody, then prior to them being preached the gospel, like if they were, I don't know, I don't remember exactly who the people were that he was talking about there, but I think it's probably the Pharisees, wasn't it?
I believe that's
Yeah. And so, like up until that point, because even Paul refers to himself as having been righteous according to the law.
Mm-hmm.
But so they would have been like, I don't know how to fully square all that like on the cuff right now, but because Paul also talks about like, Paul referred to himself as, if I'm going to boast in the flesh, right, I was righteous by the law. But I don't think that he's making that statement as like, I think he's referring to I was righteous by the law, like more in a, like the way I considered myself. Because Paul also talks about like, it's by the law is the knowledge of sin, and the law, no man can be righteous by the law. So Paul's also the one who writes that too. So anyway, but so the Pharisees, they had every room to think of themselves as righteous under the law. But then for him to come and preach the gospel to them and for them to reject it, they're making a judgment. And so he's giving them new information by which they're making a judgment. And by judging to, as a result, that results in them rejecting it, that now is exposing, the corruptness of their heart. It's not fully the same mechanism that we're describing here in the Romans thing. There's a common element, and then there's also like not the exact same.
So is it kind of like the Gentiles, if they had no knowledge of God, no knowledge of Jesus or whatever, then of course they're not living in sin because they don't know anything. But then if they're told about God and told about Jesus and they reject them, then they're living in sin. Is that what you're getting at?
Well, okay, so if you just have a Gentile that never heard of the law or of Jesus,
Lives in the jungle in Africa.
yeah, that. I mean, here, let me read what Paul says here.
Wait, you didn't tell Mufasa?
By
No one
one
told
man,
me.
sin entered into the world, and death by sin. And so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. So men were sinning. All men have been sinning, even if they don't know that they're sinning, if they aren't aware of it, that they're sinning. And we understand that from the standpoint of, because we know free will is sin, right?
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's why this is confusing to me.
Yeah. And, well, looking at, like, free will of sin actually makes that even easier, because he's basically presenting oneness with God, and for them to reject that, like, it's further exposing that they're siding with free will, they're siding with sin. All right, so for all that have sinned, for until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed when there is no law. Which that makes sense. Like, you can imagine, like, even with somebody like Julie, right? So she's going to go, and she might be doing some naughty things, but you might also be aware that she doesn't know she's doing naughty things. Now, once you've told her, hey, this is naughty, then if she continues to do it, then you would be imputing discipline to her.
Okay, that makes sense, because it doesn't say if I had not come and spoken to them, they would not have sinned. It just says they would not be guilty of sin, so they were still sinning. They just weren't guilty of it because they weren't aware of it.
It's by bringing that line or that information, by telling, hey, this is naughty, then it would be, if she continued to do the thing, then you'd be like, okay, now we're going to impose consequences.
Right.
Because now you know it is. Now, she might have always been doing that thing prior to that point, but now that you've told her and instructed her, and she's still doing it, now you're going to impose consequences.